200 students came out to say, we will not stand for people being attacked because of the colour of their skin or because of where they have come from. It is exactly what we need in response to the spate of violent, racist attacks we have seen, which have come in the wake of the anti-refugee protests. No pandering to racism, but standing up strong against it. It's the same spirit which will motivate thousands of people to participate in the Ireland for All Solidarity March this Saturday at 1:30 at Parnell Square. It is now supported by almost the entire trade union movement, by migrants' organisations like Massey, the Irish Refugee Council and the Immigrant Council of Ireland, by anti-racist organisations like United Against Racism and Lecala, by feminist organisations like the National Women's Council of Ireland and Women's Collective Ireland Tala, by community organisations like Ballymun for All, Drimnagh for All, East Wall Here for All, by football clubs, by boxing clubs, the list goes on and on. They all understand the need to take a stand against racism and division. They know that in order to build a movement to force the government to actually deal with the housing crisis, the health crisis and the neglect of our communities, that we must stand united. That it only serves those who benefit from these crises to have people wrongly divided, wrongly blaming asylum seekers and refugees. The government has taken a very different approach. Last Wednesday, the Taoiseach told the Dáil that we should not play into those arguments. The very next day, he told the media we need to be fair, firm and hard when it comes to migration. He spoke about people who come to Ireland with a false story or on false pretences. It was a shameful attempt to pander to anti-refugee sentiments. And this shameful rhetoric has been matched by shameful actions. You have left over 100 people fleeing war and persecution, sleeping on the streets in the context of an increase in racist violence. Your Minister for Justice has spoken inaccurately about people coming to our country illegally while speeding up deportations. It isn't a mystery where this political rhetoric will end up, because all across Europe, your sister parties have done exactly the same thing in response to the rise of the far right. And all it has achieved is to legitimise their arguments and allow them to shape their narrative and drive their rise further. Thankfully, the thousands who will turn out on Saturday don't share your approach. They know that there are enough resources in this country for everybody to have a decent home, a decent job, a decent standard of living. And they want to see homes for all, healthcare for all, services for all. They want to see an Ireland for all. So Taoiseach, will you listen to them? Will you abandon the current strategy, combat misinformation instead of pandering to it, and tackle the underlying causes of alienation which give fuel to anti-refugee sentiment by committing to build social housing, by using vacant properties and by providing quality, accessible public health care for all?
Thanks, Deputy. Let me just say at the outset, I don't believe there's any excuse for any racism of any form, whether it's directed towards people who are new arrivals to this country, or people who've been here for a very long time, or people who've been born here. People should be judged by the content of their character and not the colour of their skin. Full stop. And I don't think any of us, coming from any perspective, whether it's centre or right or left, should try to politicise the issue of racism and try to gain from it in any way. And I certainly hope you won't be doing that, Deputy. We are facing in Europe and in Ireland an unprecedented refugee crisis, the likes of which we have never seen in this country. And in the past year or so, we have accepted and welcomed maybe 100,000 people to Ireland, an absolutely huge number of people, most from Ukraine, but indeed others who've come from other parts of the world. And by and large, we've been able to provide them with accommodation, with food, with shelter, with heat, with light, with access to education, access to healthcare, and in many cases access to employment too. I know it hasn't been a perfect response, but I'm proud of the societal response from Ireland as to what we've managed to do in the past year. No country in Western Europe on a per capita basis has accepted as many people from Ukraine as we have. And despite the enormous challenge, I believe we've done it well in the round, and we should be willing to say that and be willing to thank the Irish people in particular and communities around the country in particular for the very warm welcome that they have given people. But it is a real struggle to continue to find more accommodation, and there's no point in being in any denial about that. If 2 years ago we had amazing foresight and we knew that Putin was going to invade Ukraine, and we'd built a city the size of Waterford with 20,000 houses and apartments for people who might come here, that place would already be full by now. That's the scale of the numbers coming in, and we have to try to manage that as best we can, and we will, Deputy. And there are lots of people who will try to exploit the migrant crisis for all sorts of reasons, on the far right and on the far left. And I won't be called out on that issue, Deputy, because I don't think it's right to conflate issues like housing or healthcare or unemployment or crime or domestic violence or any of these things with migration. No matter what problem a country has, racists on the far right will blame that on migrants, and I think it's a mistake to conflate them. There are plenty of opportunities to have a go at the government about any issue, and I know you'll take those opportunities, but don't mix it up in an anti-racism campaign, Deputy. I think that's a mistake, and I think you're playing into the hands of the far right in that regard.
Well said.
Dr. Murphy.
Thanks. Taoiseach says that the far right and the far left will exploit the migrant crisis. Taoiseach, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the far right are organising protests outside the temporary, inadequate emergency accommodation of asylum seekers. And what are the far left doing? We're working with others to build a solidarity march to say that refugees are welcome, to say that these people are not responsible for the housing crisis. I have no idea what you're talking about. Taoiseach says people shouldn't use it for political advantage. I agree. He'll be talking to Senator Regina Doherty, who has spoken about people, quote, taking advantage of some of the frailties in our system. He'll be speaking to Fianna Fáil backbencher John McGuinness, who has called for a plan to move asylum seekers into a Kilkenny City hotel to be paused. He'll be having a chat with himself, perhaps, about the use, very conscious, of fair, firm and hard, which generated precisely the headlines that he wanted. Ordinary people don't agree with your government. They disagree with your government for the creation of the housing crisis, for the representation of developers, of speculators and so on. But they also don't agree with those who try to exploit those divisions. And they will be on the street in their thousands this Saturday, 1:30 at Parnell Square. I just finally would say, Taoiseach says he's proud. Is the Taoiseach proud of over 100 people sleeping on the streets tonight with a Dunn's voucher and €5 phone credit? Is that something to be proud of?
Thanks, Deputy. It's absolutely right that people should stand up against racism. We're working on a new national anti-racism strategy. We'll have that quite soon, and we'll implement it and we'll fund it. But I don't think anyone should use an anti-racism campaign to promote a particular political party or a particular ideology, and I don't think that should be done, quite frankly, Deputy, and I'm going to keep on saying that, whether you like it or not. As I've always said, I believe migration has been a good thing for Ireland. It's been good for our economy, it's been good for our public services, and it's helped to enrich our culture as well. But people do want migration to be managed properly, and there's nothing wrong with people wanting migration to be managed properly. And that does mean being fair with refugees who come here from abroad fleeing war, making sure they get the protection that they deserve. It means having legal pathways to migration. 40,000 work permits issued last year to people coming here as economic migrants legally. But it does mean being firm with the minority of people whose story isn't true, who come here on false pretences, and saying to them that their application will be processed quickly, that it will be refused, and that they will be returned. There's nothing